Awesome, thanks so much. Well, welcome everyone, thanks for coming. So I want to kick this off by telling you a little story that happened to me last week. I was talking to one of my friends, and he works at a company where 3 engineers had recently left. They all happened to be women, but they didn't leave for any particular reason that was related. It was all personal, and they all liked the company. But his boss was super frustrated that he had to hire more engineers. And he said, that's it. I'm not hiring any more female engineers. I'm sick of this. This is a pattern. I'm annoyed. Later, he was going through the applications, and he was going, I can't pronounce any of these names. Like, ugh, you know what that means. It's very unfortunate. We talk about this topic a lot in culture. It goes from very extreme cases like that to very subtle cases. But unfortunately, it is still a topic that we're dealing with, and this is unconscious bias. And it has very large impact, particularly when it gets to hiring and progression throughout companies, because it impacts financial access to people from entire demographics and essentially makes a subtle caste system in our country. We need to change this. Now, there's a lot of companies who believe in this, and they're investing in diversity and inclusion training. However, the results are not looking that great right now. And they are using the same tools that we've been using for a millennia, because that's the only tools that they have access to. To give you, sorry about the slides, we had to reformat it last minute, like in the last 5 minutes. So McKinsey did a study that said that it is going to take 100 years before we see gender equity in the C-suite alone. So that's a big problem. Is there a clicker that I can progress? I should have asked first. This guy? Perfect, thank you guys. They're heroes for the day. Yeah, so essentially we've been using e-learning, workshops. It's good, but we have new, really exciting technology at all of our fingertips, and that is VR. And I don't need to preach to you about the immersive power of VR in education. Everyone here is in this track because you probably already understand. It's incredibly powerful. So what we're doing is we're combining these 2 subjects. We are doing diversity and inclusion training and soft skill human interaction training in virtual reality for corporations. Now, what we really found on this whole journey is that it really needs a holistic approach. It's a big, large problem. There's workshops that go into it. You need to check in using e-learning. And I don't mean to downplay those things, but I truly believe if we can start integrating the power of immersive and blended education, we can work wonders. And we as virtual reality developers are not only responsible for creating this content, we are also responsible for educating the marketplace. Because what we've consistently run across is that people don't know how to integrate this into their companies, and they need help. That is our job. We are inventing a new market. It's wanted. It needs that threshold gap. So this is what I'll be talking about. But first, before I get too deep into it, I just want to get a scope of the room. So who here is in learning and development? Okay, few people, cool. Who is in VR? Okay, I was actually expecting a full room, so that's interesting. Do we have any developers in the room? I like hearing you're interactive. How about software? Okay, so that's on that side. How about business development? Yeah, a couple BD guys. That's good stuff. Those are super necessary. So whenever I go to a talk, the first thing I want to know is, what does your product look like? So just to give you a quick overview, what you can expect. First, we'll go over what the product looks like. Then I'm going to go through a few different business case uses and examples of how it's been used in our own product. I'll go over a quick case study on each of those to give you the results that we've found, and then go over some future highlighting things and where I see this going and some trends that we've been noticing. So we have 2 different interaction models for getting this data. The first one is pull the trigger, just very simple. if you recognize something. Often this is bias if we're trying to highlight. It's really a tool to help for mindfulness, stopping and recognizing when these things are happening, because often that's that first threshold that you need to reach before you start asking people to enact behavioral change. The second is practice how would you respond. So this is often a multiple choice scenario where we have a branching decision tree. People speak to you and you choose how you would respond. So this is really the core interaction, and we're always adding new features as we go on a per client basis. The first interaction model is often reflection. So who's into the Stanford embodiment research? Does anyone follow it at all? Awesome, a few people. Essentially, Stanford did a lot of research showing that when you put someone in the body of another human, it has much longer lasting and much more impactful results when you're trying to reach empathy. So this is a pretty critical design point when you want to make someone understand another perspective, feel connected to a character. So while you look in the mirror and you get used to your new body, you're hearing an audio track telling you what environment you're about to go into, what the social interaction is, what your goals are, what you're thinking, essentially. The next thing is experience. So this is really about understanding. And often, we just put you in a situation where you can experience firsthand what it's like for that social situation to go wrong. That might be anywhere from a discriminatory situation or a boss who doesn't handle a conversation well, and it often sets the tone for what we are going to be training going forward. Recently, this was an interesting learning. I was just trying to extend the mirror scene because there's been a lot of data on length of time for reaching that cognitive emotional connection. But I did so by having you talk on the phone to a friend, telling you, oh man, this just happened, this sucks, this is how I feel about it, what are you gonna do? I don't know, that sort of conversation. And what I found that is when you're looking in the mirror and you're speaking and you see your character speaking, even though you are not verbalizing it, it's very, very connecting to the avatar. It's as if you're speaking, you feel like it. So that was super interesting design thing that we discovered. So next, we go into replay. We go into the situation as a bystander, a person in a position of power, and we practice, if you see this, how would you deal with it? That's actually very important because a lot of times, if somebody, you can interrupt these situations even if you're not the person receiving the negative behavior, but you have to be prepared for it. You have to be prepared to act. And often, these things don't happen often, so when you are in that position where you had the opportunity, if you're not mentally prepared, you often just stumble, did that just happen? And then you just gossip afterwards, which doesn't help anything. So lastly, review. So often, this is more related to the pull the trigger, but this is the data collection. How often did you recognize when this event was happening? Did it total up with how many times it actually happened? Who were you looking at more? Who was speaking more? How does that data look overlaid? And it's really interesting. Some people look at people exactly the same amount of time, and it's very aligned to their speech. Some people look at one person much longer, and getting that initial feedback is something that virtual reality offers as a medium that in-person teaching methods don't. And for me personally, we all have issues we're dealing with. It's been a journey for me. I have been more aware of how my body language is throughout a conversation significantly just from doing and designing this so often. So often when we're doing this, it sits within a larger workshop. It's very important to have context, priming, and to have everyone thinking and talking about this together, and for this to become a socialized norm within a company, we've found. So we've done some studies on it, and we found that it's really effective. So now I'm going to go through a few different case studies and business models of how we're using it and what the results have been. So in the first one, we were working with one of Australia's largest banks to take a look at e-learning versus virtual reality. In this scenario, we were taking a 30-minute e-learning experience and converting it down to 8 minutes. The focus was customer service, and we were running it as a pilot to, we're still in discussions about expanding to a much larger rollout. So these were really cool. 99% of people felt that they could empathize with the main character. And in this scenario, it was covering an LGBT-esque situation. And we did have some people go through and go, oh, that's not real. And then literally another guy would go through and, man, I'm gay, and that literally just happened to me last week. And it was insightful for starting to start those conversations for people who hadn't ever lived that, never could have. So the empathy was a really good part. The immersion was interesting. So for those of you who are teachers, educators, you understand capturing someone's attention, keeping that attention is pretty hard. 86% were fully in the VR world, not paying attention or thinking about other things, actions. So they knew how to act if they saw this in the workplace. In engagement, 96% would have strongly preferred VR over e-learning, which that one's not too much of a surprise to me. How many people are familiar with the Net Promoter Score, NPS? So, okay, 1. I'll go over it really quick. The NPS score scores from a negative 100 to 100. So if you're sitting at 0, you are about average. You're like doing okay. 6 or 7, you're like good results. So the fact that we nailed a 9.1 on that really, really, really tells me there's an appetite for this. People are enjoying it actively, and they're referring friends to this. And I don't know about you, but I've never felt that way about an e-learning course. I used to go way out of my way to copy down the answers and do anything I could to get out of e-learning courses when I worked in corporate. Okay, so it's effective. That's, lots of research, lots of case studies, that's great. Is it scalable? This is a common question we get asked, and the answer is yes. So the next business case use was really starting to look at that. In this situation, we were working with a training consultant L&D firm called Moi, based out of Sydney, Australia. They specialize in HR, and they wanted a VR component to help make their workshops more effective. And they were servicing the domain group, their client. So we had almost 700 participants in this. We were going over 5 countries, or not countries, different states, 5 locations. We had the same VR application. So if you're talking A/B testing, you're talking getting people to communicate with each other, they had the same experience. It really tied that together and made that a cohesive presence for them. And it was only 5 minutes per person. So the way we did it is we set up a dedicated VR room, had them book in, okay, I'm gonna come in within this hour, there's coffee, snacks, networking, and they would all go through. And then afterwards, as a group, they would all run through the workshop together. Now that was running on Oculus, the last Oculus. These numbers are great, but Oculus Quest coming out is gonna blow these out of the water. So I really think we're gonna start looking at a synthesis of scale as the industry moves forward on these sorts of topics, which I'm really excited about. So the results for this, again, were really good. 75% could empathize. 89% were more receptive to this surrounding workshop because they had more context. They felt more connected with what was going on. It's actually really interesting when you're talking about direct feed to the brain, behavioral science, it takes away a lot of the psychological resistance because you're experiencing it firsthand. So yeah, that was interesting. I was curious about that number. 40% had a better understanding of D&I walking into it, and then 98% said that they felt like they had a better understanding of how they could play a personal role in this to bring this out to their company. I'm sorry, I had that written down. I remember that personal role and confidence were very connected, just confidence that they would know what to do in that situation. Okay. So those 2 were just classic business case uses. One is serving a marketing or a group that is servicing another group. One is directly serving the group. So each of these worked on a custom build, which is fairly expensive. I am familiar with the fact that as a inclusivity company, it's fairly ironic to say, okay, that's great, we're trying to help people, but only if you can afford the price tag. And a lot of people have been reaching out who just couldn't afford that price line that we were hitting. So as a solution, we, 3 months ago, took some of our generic content and released it as an off-the-shelf product. We tied it into a package of, we have documents basically telling you how do you execute some example workshop structures. And we've actually had a lot of different people doing it, a lot of people running demos, selling to how they could use in management, some lower tier firms who want to train this. But one of the most interesting outcomes, which I didn't expect, was a high school downloaded it. So this is content geared towards working professionals and bias that you receive at work. And the high schools got it, went through a bias workshop class, and then said they were so inspired that they wrote their own scripts around prejudice, around this topic. And they came up with really good content. It was really impressive. They were tackling really difficult subjects like racial discrimination and in-grouping and out-grouping and bullying and things that were very impactful for their lives. This is one of the things I get most excited about, because if you can start getting these concepts in early while the brain is still forming, developing, it's so much easier to enact behavioral change. Rewiring the brain to have a different behavioral pattern set is so difficult, and it gets more difficult as you get older. So getting good habits in early is just critical. So I was super excited to see that one. Another very interesting outcome of the off-the-shelf product is essentially, because we don't have to run it, anyone can run it, and it eliminated borders. We have a very international team. My co-founder Rick is here. He's from Australia, I'm from the US. And we've always had an eye on international scale, but this is what's been happening. So we have people running our stuff in London, Sweden, Germany, Singapore, Hong Kong, Adelaide, Perth, Sydney, Melbourne. Oh, there's another in Australia. I'm slipping my mind. We have a few places, South America, so we're in Brazil, Chile, and we're also in San Francisco, Denver, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., and Austin. And Chiang Mai, that was one of the ones I was forgetting. So I forgot to put that on, but in Thailand as well. But it's been crazy. How do you start reaching international scale? Well, you make things available. You help people as best they can. And this really just gets down to having open mentality. I see this 1,000 times, but it's kind of scary to put yourself out there. But if you can be gentle with your own fears and be open, be communicative, have a partnership mentality, it really, really helps open the world up. So again, we're all about partnership mentality, open, flexibility. We try to put flexibility into our company at the core. And one of the things about that is supporting your customers and growing their market. So although we're coming in with VR, it could be fairly scary for trainers and facilitators who fear that this technology might replace them. And truly, you have to study their market and say, how can we help you? How can we make you better and make your work go further? And not only, I believe, we can do this through making it more effective, but we can do it through scale. Just as we are now scaling to all these countries, I really see a future where the workshop training is created, the VR sits within it, and this can be sold and bought by people who are well outside their range that they could normally service. We were just on the Expo floor, and we were so excited because we saw a video conferencing application that was actually really, really good. We're like, whoa, trainers could jump in this, do their workshop to someone on the other side of the world, run the VR simulation, like good to go, snap package. That's immediately value add. So you always want to be looking at value add for your clients, your end users, and for yourself. Secure your safety mask before securing the safety mask of others. So that was essentially what I was talking about, combining the trainers, the workshops, and proliferating, helping them do so as much as possible. And the last thing I want to touch on, excuse me, on the accessibility front is accessibility to creators. So this is just a little highlight of our internal software tool that we use to develop the VR training, and we call it the Creator Suite. It gets a little more nuanced, but the high level is actually pretty easy. It's a Unity tool used to create this training specifically, where we've solved a lot of the hard problems like the inverse kinematics, the looking around, the scanning, and the facial animation of the characters, and we just make it pretty easy, right in the script, who's talking, who's looking at who, handles all the back end. So I'll just go over it really quick. We essentially just, you start oh, the GIFs aren't working, that's a shame. That's okay. So it's a Unity tool, you go over, you click, start a scene. Once you've done that, it automatically creates a mirror reflection scene and a meeting scene. So in the reflection scene, you just go in and you populate what is the dialogue going on. So this is the narrator giving you context on your life, what you're about to go into. And in the meeting scene, there's a little drop-down menu where you get to choose your characters. All of our characters are scanned using photogrammetry and converted over to a base model rig, which we convert over. So that really helps with scale. If you say you're like, I need this specific type of person, this ethnicity, or I want Bob in my app, Bob can be in the app, very easy. And then the last thing is just filling out the dialog tree. So this gets into, I want them to say this, I want them to be doing this while that's happening, I want a branching scenario, or I want the dialogue to jump around. It just, it's building out that decision tree. These things can be moved around pretty easily. And then the last thing is just the data. It's literally just put a data scene at the end. It's all automated. As I said, who's looking at who, all that complexity is taken care of. And then I get the geek happy every time I get this, but get integration. That means that you can have a project online and you can have multiple people working on it simultaneously. Whatever changes one person makes gets uploaded, the other person downloads it, really small download. It makes it really easy for teams to work together from multiple places, which we often are not only in multiple places, but are in multiple countries. So that's been a lifesaver for us. This seems awesome. Why limited access? So I should have said this earlier, I meant to. Essentially, this is a closed beta program. The reason for this is because we are an organic growth company, and we are currently only supporting taking as many people into this program as we can support. We intend to grow this further, and that's just, it's ethical. I'm not going to sign people up and then not be able to help them or have it derail our other business objectives. So we tend to prioritize partnering with people who are adding back to the community. Right now, we're not quite at the stage where it's at the enterprise level model where we'd be charging per seat. So in exchange, we're looking for partners who are able to contribute in some way. So a lot of times that's code, that's art assets, or that's research. And an example of that, we are right now rolling out with Queensland University, we're working with the Human Behavioral Science Department and the Computer Science Department, and they're creating a ton of training, doing a ton of research about it. We're also working with small companies who have teams that do, add a lot back, but just want all that back end taken care of for them, don't want to deal with it. So it gives them a leg up so they don't have to do all that extra work. So really, in conclusion, as I said, this all comes down to accessibility, making this easy to use, easy to reach, and supporting the entire market. So I really, truly see VR as being used for high-value tasks. And it's really important to design it and, from business development perspective, focus on those tasks where it's adding immediate value. The assessments, there's totally a place for e-learning when you need to do constant checkups, regular assessments, you need to tie it into an LMS system. It's still really important, and it has its place. It's just not the be-all, end-all solution. And then finally, workshops. I really think that there will always be a place for human interaction. And if you're, again, into the learning space, I love the Gestalt model of learning where you're trying, reflecting, coming back. You need that reflections time. You need that time to connect it to your own life, to have the subject matter be meaningful to you before anything is going to ever have any sort of internal impact. Really just gets down to working with people better. It's helping companies work together better. It's working with the community better. It's working with your own team better. Just work with people better. That's it. Thanks.